a lot of a devotional book that my wife uses. It seems fairly often that the things you read in devotions kind of fit with where you are, and my wife often makes notes about such things in her Bible and in books that she reads. And this morning she brought me this to read. It has particular significance to us, to my wife and me, I suppose, but I think it will have some significance to some of you as well. I think we've been under some rather special attack in the last week, partly because of where we are in the process of working with one of the ladies we work with. We believe we're at a major breakthrough, and that the Satanists are really working very, very hard to prove that their power is strong enough to keep her from really finding healing. The issue right now is that she was to always be a big fat cow, is what they always told her, or whatever else, and she weighed 385 pounds when she first came to us, and that she would never get married and never be able to have children. And it appears that God has other plans for her, that he wants to prove that that's wrong, but their reputation as Satanists is almost at stake if she is lost to this cause. There's lots of ways in which we have seen the evidence of their working, both physically and emotionally and other ways in her life. And April 29th is a high ceremonial day in Satanism, April 29th and 30th, where they would be having special rituals. And some of you a few of you at least, have spoken to me about sensing some very special warfare going on in recent days here on campus. And some of you may know there's a special prayer meeting tonight to pray about that. Again, we don't want to focus on Satan unduly and give him more credit than he deserves, but we do want to recognize the reality of the battle and participate in it as we ought. Well, this is the devotional. And Moses said unto the people, Fear not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. Exodus 14:13. As the children of Israel left Egypt, they found themselves in a dangerous situation. In front was the Red Sea. Advancing from the rear was the enemy, and on both sides mountains. They were frightened, for their eyes were focused in the wrong direction, upon the Egyptians instead of upon the Lord. The children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. What could they do? Nothing. Trapped. They were looking for a way of escape. But Moses said, Fear ye not, stand still. God was in control, and they could trust him to open a way where there was no way. Moses continued, And see the salvation of the Lord. They were to be still, and with their spiritual eyes look to the only one who could bring deliverance. The Lord shall fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Red Sea experiences come into each of our lives. We are hedged in with no visible way of escape. God's words, fear not, are for us today. We may be trapped as the children of Israel were, but we need not fear. God's power is limitless. He will open a way for us where there is none. Our part is to stand still and wait upon God. Only God knows and can lead us in the way that is best. Only God is strong enough to deliver us from the attacks of the enemy. In our walk of faith, there is no place for human activity. Trying to fight our battles with earthly weapons is wasted energy. We must stand by and let the Lord do the fighting. Hezekiah said of his enemy, "With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles." It doesn't require faith to begin a journey when we can see the way through. Faith is taking the next step when we can't see beyond it. I don't know if you've ever felt yourself in that kind of a position or not, but I have on more than one occasion, and that's when you really find your faith tested. That's where you find out what you really believe, as we were talking about earlier. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that you brought your people out of that trap. Thankful that when there was no way from the human perspective, that the situation was never out of your control, that you're the master of the sea, you're the master of the mountains, you're the master of those armies. And you not only delivered your people from the army, but you destroyed the army in the very sea that seemed to be a deterrent to the progress of your people. So we know, Lord, that you're able to take those things that look to us like enemies and blocks in our way and turn them into even the instruments you may use to accomplish your purposes. Lord, increase our faith. We so often are earthbound in our perspectives, and we see the mountains, and we see the enemies, and we see the seas. We see all the human dimensions to our problems. Help us to see the divine dimension, and to know that nothing is ever out of your control, nothing is ever too hard for the Lord. So, Lord, we do lift our eyes to you again today, and we dare to rest in who you are and in the power that we know you have over all the circumstances of life. Grant to us that faith and obedience in our own lives that will enable you to demonstrate the victory we know that you want to win in this battle. We commit ourselves once again to you. We commit each one here. We know there are some with very special kinds of problems and pressures. And we pray that they will find in you and in the other members of the body that resource which is needed for this day. We just commit it to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we were talking at the end of the period Tuesday about the relationship between Christians and demons, and I want to simply summarize the ways in which this may happen in a little diagram which was originally made by a psychiatrist who, for his own reasons, prefers not to be identified. But he talks about degrees of demonization, and we talked about the background of the word demonization, where it comes from. And we're looking at a continuum, again, which runs from no demonization to full demonization at the other end of this continuum, or another way of looking at it from outside influence, where demons are on the outside working against us, to where they are on the inside. But you will note that I have put these words in quotation marks because, in a sense, outside and inside is perhaps not the real issue. We talked about the demon being outside and sending his spiritual impulses into my brain and thus causing physical things to happen in me that might look like there was a demon in there doing it, but it's not that there's a literal demon at some point in my body, but that the stimuli from my brain are producing those responses. We don't really I don't think, have to answer that question. As far as I'm concerned, it really isn't that isn't the fundamental issue. It isn't whether the demon is physically, spatially here or inside, but whether it is controlling my mind and my life to the extent that I can't live to the glory of God, that I can't carry out God's purposes in my life. So I think we want to focus on the critical issues, and that is not essentially, in my judgment, a spatial consideration. But nevertheless, the terms are used, and so I have left them here as they were on the original diagram. He begins by talking simply about temptation or hassle. Satan is out to tempt us, obviously. Everyone is subject to temptation. He's out to just hassle us to the point that we can't live as effectively as we want to live. Spiritual warfare doesn't begin with supernatural, bizarre experiences. Spiritual warfare begins right here with this hassle that we're all in every day. And not to recognize that fact is, and again, to give the enemy an advantage. I don't think we talked about this earlier. Let me just add at this point that I think God appoints guardian angels for us, that simply is part of God's plan. Spoke about children, that their angels do always behold my face. The angel of the Lord encamps round about those that fear him and delivers them. That there is a sense in which the angels are God's instruments of blessing to us. And it's not that God needs help, that he's weak, but that he has ordained that that's the way it is. Satan then is a counterfeiter or an imitator, and he therefore also assigns a fallen angel to each one of us to be two things especially. One is this tempter and hassler, just to keep us under such constant surveillance that they know where our weak areas are. They know where we're most likely to succumb to temptation. And so they watch for the opportunities to get in their lick, as it were. They wait for the trauma to strike, for the disaster to come, for the emotions to rise, and then they ride in on that and intensify it. And notice that I'm not saying that they directly cause every problem that I have in life, but that they are there to intensify those problems. They're just monitoring us. The second function they perform is to know us well enough that after we die, if someone tries to contact us in a seance, that spirit could impersonate us and know enough right answers about us to make the people think they're talking to us. And we often call them familiar spirits. They're spirits that are familiar with us. That's their job. Now, the term familiar spirit is used in certain other ways at times, but that's at least part of the meaning of that term. So I assume that we're always under this kind of hassle. And again, it's not that we want to get our eyes focused on Satan and demons, but we simply have to recognize that he's there. And this is where we again run into this problem of keeping balance, because what I'm saying could very easily be interpreted to say, you're saying there's a demon behind every bush. And in a sense, that's exactly what I'm saying. That demons are a continuing part of our lives. What I'm not saying is that that's the only thing that's there, and that that's the only explanation system, and that we don't have to be concerned about the personal relationships and my personal responsibilities, the personal disciplines that I need to build into my life. So many people, in order to avoid that extreme, have given up the possibility that there are really demons monitoring us all the time. They want to say contact with the demon would be a very rare experience. I think we are probably in almost constant contact. You know, Satan can't be that dumb to just not try to take advantage of us. He's got to know that as long as we're in the flesh, we are subject to weakness in some area of life. We all have our foibles. And he's got to be there to take advantage of them. So it begins with this temptation and hassle. Now, this particular diagram is going to have a series of words exposed which are not biblical in the sense that they have clear theological definitions. They are simply this psychiatrist's choice of words to indicate this progression, and he calls this oppression. Some would say that's too strong a word for this stage of things, and I probably am going to redo the diagram and simply use the word temptation for this first box, but I simply use it as it is because that's the way it came from him. If you don't handle this area well, if you don't resist the temptation, if you don't understand the hassle that's going on, it begins to affect your function. And at that point, you come under a kind of demonic obsession where there is something going on a continuing basis that you can't really handle. I've given you an illustration of a young man who had this obsession about neatness and would fly into a rage if everything wasn't neat in his apartment and so on. My wife and I learned something about this a few years ago when we were driving home from Rockford, and we had been, interestingly, it was the first time we had gone back to the scene of the accident that nearly took my life in '82. We wanted to see, among other things, if being there would trigger any memories in my mind and so on, and it hadn't. But at any rate, on the way home, I remember thinking, if Satan can't get you one way, you have to expect that he's going to try another way. And I apparently had said a couple of times on the way home from Rockford something about something being dumb, my life, or stupid. My wife just doesn't like to hear me say those words. For some reason, somebody will make a bad maneuver in traffic, and I say, boy, that was dumb. And she doesn't like to have me say that. And so I missed a turn, got on the wrong road, and I was pretty sure I knew where I was, but I said, why don't you just check the map? And she said, which map? I said, I don't care which map, the map of the area, and she was already smarting a bit from, she had really transferred the ideas of being dumb to my saying that she was dumb, and suddenly there were feelings there that generated a critical spirit that just persisted for, I don't know how long it was. I don't remember if it was a matter of a week or 2 weeks, or I frankly don't remember the time frame, but I remember that we had this compulsively critical spirit between ourselves. And what that was doing was simply eliminating the possibility that we could be an effective ministry team. You can't sit down and help other people handle their problems when you've got this sparks flying between you. And it wasn't that we were arguing, we were just not communicating and sensing this critical spirit. Well, our function was being affected by that. We were under attack, hadn't handled it well, and because we hadn't handled this well, we were at this stage that until we did something about that, we were in problems in carrying on our ministry. Well, the Lord, I think, allowed that to happen to teach us a lesson. And I remember finally saying, Lord, I know this is not from you. I know that it's not what I want, not the new person that I am in Christ, we talked about the other day. So I ask you to forgive me for allowing it to control me. I should have recognized what was happening right up front and not allowed that kind of a critical spirit to dominate me. And I command the spirit that's putting me under this pressure to leave. And it was gone. My wife did the same thing. If she were here, she would tell you that she was lying in bed when she did it. And she sensed this pressure go, and we were back to normal. Not to perfection. I'm not saying that you solve marriage communication problems that way. We're still working on the communication problems. That's kind of an ongoing process. You have to periodically sit down and talk it out. And we're still doing that after 35 years of marriage. We haven't achieved perfection, but we did get rid of the pressure. We got rid of that compulsive spirit of criticism.
Prior to this class, I would have classified that as a function of my sinful nature, rather than from an external force operating.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm saying is it's both. That it started as a function of my sinful nature. That's what opened the door in the first place. That's what my wife was struggling with her reactions to my using the word dumb and stupid, and what I was wrestling with in my response to her response. And that is the flesh. That's where it started. And that's why I had to say, God, forgive me for allowing this to control me. Had I recognized it at that point, I would have dealt with it simply as the normal hassle of life and not given the devil a chance to get in and intensify it to the point that it became something more than that, more than just an encounter.
Could there not be situations that it just remains that flow of the sinful nature?
Oh, of course. Of course. Of course. And that's what I think what it would have been had we dealt with it immediately. And we have situations, I don't know, it's on a daily basis, but just in the ongoing of life where something happens and the old nature wants to respond a certain way, or the flesh wants to respond a certain way, and you just immediately you say, I'm not going to let the flesh control. I'm going to think God's thoughts, and you do it, and it's gone. And you get on with life. Sure, that's the way you ought to handle it. But what I'm saying is if you don't do that, if you don't handle it correctly, then you leave the door open for this intensification of it. Okay. See, that's our problem, that we don't deal with things immediately when they come. It's like anger. You can't not be angry. You can't not have emotions of any kind. Emotions happen really at a subconscious level. My psychiatrist brother says that it's like the brain has two lobes. The conscious part of the brain, conscious part, and the subconscious or the unconscious, and the stimuli come into the subconscious level of the brain and create the emotion here. And then, as he phrases it, it's like the telephone rings up in the conscious part of the brain, and you answer it, and it says you're angry. And then you have to decide what you're going to do with that. You can slam the receiver down and say, "No, I'm not." But that's not very convincing to anybody, and it really doesn't solve the problem. Or you can just kind of nonchalant it and that kind of gives anger the right to continue. Or you can say, yes, I'm angry. And the minute you say, yes, I'm angry, you've taken about 50% of the step toward the solution to it. Admitting that the anger is there is the major step toward dealing with it. And then you can decide what you're going to do with it. Now, I don't want to be unduly simplistic about it, but there are at least three basic ways you can handle anger. Let me shut this thing off. Anger, we're kind of on a little sidetrack here, but that's okay. Anger probably is always a secondary reaction to some sense of frustration, sense of threat. Something happens that you can't handle. You are most apt to get angry when you feel that you're out of control, or that circumstances are out of control, that if somebody attacks you in an area of your strength, you're much less apt to get angry because you are confident that you can handle it. But if they attack you in an area of your weakness, you're much more apt to respond emotionally because you're under threat. So the key to it is, in the first place, accepting your weaknesses so that you're saying the truth about yourself, and your honesty lowers that threat level. If you can talk honestly about who you are. For example, I'm facing most directly. I've always known this, but I'm verbalizing it and working on it in a way that I never worked on it before. But I'm basically an emotional loner. I grew up in a family that didn't communicate. I don't remember my parents ever sitting down with me and talking through something. I don't remember them ever putting their arms around me and saying, I love you. They loved me, no doubt about that. But we were not a touching, affectionate family. We were not a communicating family. My son asked me the other day, when your first wife died, who did you talk to? And my answer was nobody. I don't remember a pastor or anybody ever coming to me and saying, do you need to talk? And I didn't know anybody I could go to talk. And so I've always internalized things. I would intellectualize them. I could think them through theologically, but basically I have never had a best friend. I've never had a confidant. And that's a great weakness. That's not a strength for me. It's a very great weakness for me. And my ability to talk to you as a class about it is I hope part of the evidence of my transparency and my maturity that by confronting it becomes less of a point where I'm apt to be threatened and respond emotionally if you accuse me of that, because I've already said it. So the threat is already diffused. So we're most apt to become angry at some point where we're not saying the truth about ourselves, and where there may be some blocked memories, some of those emotions where we've slammed down the receiver and said, no, I'm not, and we're still denying it, that it's there. And we've got to get past the denial stage to admitting what our needs really are. So there is that threat level that we have to deal with. And if we don't, then that produces the anger. And anger then will be expressed in one of three ways, well, generally one of two ways. One is rage. And that's where the Bible says you shouldn't be angry with your brother. He who is angry is the same as what? A murderer. And if you allow rage to go to its legitimate or complete conclusion, it would lead to murder. You would destroy that other person that you're angry with. Now, doesn't always go that far, but that's the end of this external venting of anger as rage. You may bottle it up inside as resentment. And that won't kill the other person, but it will be slow suicide for the person who is destroying themselves by the resentment that they keep inside. Now, by and large, those are the two ways people handle anger. And the therapist will get the person that's blocking the anger in to express it this way. So the counseling centers have anger rooms where you go in and pound pillows or beat on things or hammer things to vent the anger. And, you know, at a certain point, that may be exactly what needs to happen. You're admitting that you're angry, but you can't go on through life doing that. I had a psychoanalytically oriented Marxian Episcopalian clergy professor at New York University. And he told us that after his psychoanalysis, he got a chopping block down in his basement. And when he got mad at his wife, he went down and chopped her to pieces on the chopping block and got rid of his aggressions. Well, see, that's the venting of anger, but that's not a solution. That's not a Christian solution. That's simply a stopgap to keep you from actually doing this. The other problem, of course, is that the resentment is just bottled up inside, and this is often couched with denial, that you're not angry. Ladies said, you know, I have forgiven my parents, I can care of that, except that sometime later she came up out of a memory situation saying, I'll kill them, you know, and that resentment was very, very deep and had to be dealt with. So you need to deal with it back at this level before it gets to these stages. And one of the best ways to do that is to handle it with indignation. And this is directed at not the person who wronged you, not yourself in this sense, but it's directed at Satan. And I don't know what word to use here to make parallel with murder and suicide, but you're really resisting the devil, or you're expressing anger at the devil. In terms of our basic diagram, it will look something like this, that we have tended to see ourselves down here at the bottom we tend to see ourselves down here as victims. And we look up and we get locked into our feelings against these people. We're talking about somebody that's wronged us and created anger, and it doesn't matter whether it's Christian or non-Christian, you're going to have the same basic relationship. And if we're directing our thoughts and our anger against people, we're locked in. That's that chain. We haven't gotten to that yet. We'll come to that a little later. But what the Lord wants to do is to help us see that He can take us out of this victim situation and bring us up here and let us look back on it and see that here is the real problem. The reason my parent treated me the way that he treated me was because he is under some control of Satan. Now, that isn't to say that he doesn't have any personal responsibility, but it is to say that there is another dimension to the problem. And it is the whole dimension of spiritual warfare. That Satan is the source of the problems that we face in the world, that he is the author of them, that he is the one who is perpetuating them, and that as God delivers me from being a victim and brings me to a point of victory, I can then look at Satan and be angry with him and direct my anger any day of the week at the devil. God is angry at the devil every day. It says, blessed are those that hate evil. And it's okay to hate evil. A demon has more than once said to me, I hate you. And I say, that's fine, I hate you for what you're doing to this person. And demon said once, not to me, but to another counselor, but Christians aren't supposed to hate. And he said, my Bible says, do not I hate those that hate thee, O Lord, I hate them with a perfect hatred. And the demon said, you would have to find that verse. The demons will use the Bible and twist it, and try to get you to say you should never be angry. Now, if you buy the principle that it's unchristian to be angry, you're in big trouble, because you probably can't not be angry. If the emotion really does happen at the subconscious level, every time the phone rings and says you're angry, you're going to have to say, no, I'm not, because a Christian can't be angry. That just isn't true. You have to have the quality, the ability to be angry with evil. And you see, this is part of the problem of people who say, well, I can watch those horror movies and the whodunits and all of that, and, it doesn't affect me. I can watch the soap operas and it doesn't affect me. If you can watch that stuff and not be affected negatively by it, you've been affected profoundly. Because in the Christian, there's got to be something that says, God, people weren't made to treat other people that way. That's evil. That's the essence of the activity of the enemy. And I'm looking at it with enjoyment, profoundly affected. But Satan is so clever, you see. He will tell us all these kinds of things that I never get angry. I'm above anger. It's not Christian to be angry. And so you can look at evil and not get angry. We need to have a capacity to be angry with the devil. And I don't hesitate at all to tell the devil I hate him. I hate him with a impassioned hatred, for what he does to my Lord and what he does to my Lord's people. Well, that was kind of a long side excursion, but I think that's the relationship between my responsibility to handle things initially at this level. When they progress to this level, then I've got to do something different with them.
I'm somewhat concerned in this illustration you haven't dealt with the relationship, it doesn't appear to me, with the person.
With the person. Well, we'll come to that later if you'll...
You have a negative reaction
Yeah.
to the person above, but you haven't dealt with it.
Well, to put it very simply, the relationship between here and here is forgiveness. That's bottom line. There is no healing of relationships without forgiveness. And it is forgiveness that enables you to be here. You can't really be here unless you have broken the bonds down here by forgiveness. We'll talk about that more specifically later on, but that's a good point.
Notice the relationship between forgiveness and some of those other stuff.
Yeah. Okay, well, back to the diagram. So we were at the level where the demons were taking advantage of the fact that we hadn't handled this well, and it's beginning to affect function. If you don't handle that properly, they just set up camp and stay for the duration until you decide to do something about it. And this is where many people have allowed practices, attitudes, problems in their lives to simply persist because they haven't dealt with it at an earlier stage, and it becomes institutionalized. We have a tremendous ability to institutionalize problems. We do it with our government. We have a national problem, so we create a bureau in Washington to handle the problem, and that bureau institutionalizes the problem because if they solve it, why, they have to go out of business. And that would be bad because they lose their job. It's a strange business. And We do that sometimes with our problems in our lives. We just don't deal with them and allow Satan to simply set up camp there, or as he calls it, in habitation. And that has that hold or ground, various words that may be used, the place, the Ephesians 4:27, foothold in our lives. At that point, we would say the person is demonized, not demon-possessed. They have that base camp firmly established that we talked about the other day. Then there would be a fourth stage where demons really have control, and that would be the only point where you would properly use the term possession. Now, even there, you have to talk about degrees of control. Every non-Christian is under the control of Satan to the extent that his destiny is hell. And there's little more significant than that in terms of having control over a person's life. But there are degrees of ability to function even in normal life itself. So I would say Christians may be involved at any of these levels. That only non-Christians would be involved at the level of possession. And when it comes to dealing with these problems, that the Christian should certainly be prepared to deal with these levels on their own initiative. They should use the spiritual disciplines, the armor, the weapons, to resist the devil at these levels. Technically, they can do it at this level. A Christian, if they claim their position in Christ, if they take back the ground through confession and repentance, they have as much authority as anybody else. But I think they are apt to need the assistance of the church, and by church I don't mean the organized church necessarily, though ideally ministry should always go on within the context of the church, but simply other Christian people. And often it will be simply a matter of the humility involved in confession. The James 5, confess your faults one to another that you may be healed. And the willingness to talk about the problems. I told you about the young man who was the closet pornographer. And he said, I've never told anybody this before. But the minute he confessed it to us, it was like the confession itself broke the power of it. It was out in the open now and could be dealt with. It wasn't secret that Satan was using it, started here, and had gotten to this point, and as long as that ground was there and cloaked in secrecy, it wasn't being dealt with. But the minute he confessed it to us, it was out in the open and it could be dealt with, and forgiveness could be received from the Lord, and that simply broke the power of the demons, and they were cast out, and the compulsive level of it was gone. So he needed the assistance of the church to do that, maybe simply for the aspect of confession, if nothing else. I think that, again, this is a delicate balance between the kind of confession which becomes almost the touchstone of spirituality. There was a movement when I was a boy called the Buckman movement, which I think eventually became the Oxford movement. And their meetings tended to be characterized by seeing who could confess the biggest sin. And, it got a very unwholesome focus on public confession of sin. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about with a trusted Christian, with someone that can handle it, that you bare your soul. In a sense, that's what I'm saying about my own life that I have missed, was someone that I could just unload with and just be who I am and not have to keep this facade out here that says I'm the in control, mature Christian leader. When I'm coming apart, I need to be able to talk to somebody about it. There are days when I feel like I don't want to be dramatic, but I do. I feel like a colossal failure, and and you can get perspectives on your life that you can interpret any way you want. And at those times, you really need somebody to talk to. And so we need the church. And part of it is simply God forces us to the point where we say we need each other. We really never get to the point where we say, all I need is God. I don't need you. I'm sorry if you don't understand, but I've got the Lord. That's all I need. I'm Mr. Super Spiritual. I don't think God will ever honor that kind of position. He will always bring us to the point where we need the church.
I think on that bottom part, by different assisted by the church, I would be tempted to not make a division there at all, and simply put them all together.
Well, as a matter of fact, I just redesigned this yesterday and wiped this one out. It won't be on the next version of the chart.
I see the church as being influential.
You're exactly right. It's a matter of continuum again, of degrees.
It's a matter of degrees.
Of degrees.
My fear would be that someone will look at this and say, well, I have to handle this on my own.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And I in fact, I made a new copy of it yesterday and was going to make a new overhead and didn't get that far. I should have just not uncovered it. But that is indeed my intent, and it's a very good point.
How clear of a line do you feel? How definite is the line there between that you have for non-Christians only and Christians involved in this?
Well, I'm going to be giving you a copy of the new version of the chart. I'm waiting to give it to you until I get it printed up, but you'll notice that this is a solid line, this is a dotted line. On the new version, this will be a solid line, this will be the dotted line. And the only reason we have boxes here at all is because we're Westerners. That's the way we think. We think in boxes. And it's not that neat. See, what we should do probably is simply to leave it at that we're on a continuum. And we have stopping points, all kinds of places along this continuum. So, yeah. Well, it's the same problem with diagrams that we talked about before.
Do you feel there's a sense in which, though, we can say that the complete form, if you will, or the most severe form of demon possession can only occur for non-Christians?
Well, is there a sense in which we can say that only the most severe form of possession happens only to non-Christians? If you define possession in the usual English definition of ownership, yes, Satan doesn't own a Christian. It's a matter of semantics, of how you define your terms. See, there are many people who would say that this couldn't happen to a Christian.
Then in that chart, you better write ownership up there, because it says demons have control.
Well, my lead into this is to define possession and demonization, and why I use demonization for this whole thing rather than possession. If you read, Penn Lewis, for example, the classic, she uses possession for almost any of this. I think, by and large, Unger does in his book. He talks about possession, and what he's talking about is at least this stage, not just this stage. So I'm using a very narrow definition of possession. And that's why I basically don't use the term. You don't hear me talking about people being demon-possessed. Even non-Christians, I don't think we should use the term demon-possessed unless we mean by it that they're in Satan's kingdom and going to hell. I suppose, you can't get a much higher level of possession than that when it comes to the real issues. But if you're talking about being a Gadarene demoniac, unable to live in normal society, not wearing clothes and having a supernatural strength and all of that, then that's still another definition. So we've got a semantic problem, and you have to define terms. And I would, I guess, prefer just not to use this term at all. It's here because the psychiatrist had it on his chart in the first place, and I haven't changed it, and I haven't decided what other word might say it better. But you do need to understand that all of these attempts at analysis and putting things in nice, neat boxes is an accommodation to our need to systematize and analyze and synthesize, and that life just isn't that neat. You can't draw those lines that finely. But the point of the chart is to show that there are degrees of relationship to demons coming from the very beginning on to the most advanced. Now, however we can say that, that's what we want to say.
I'm wondering about Christians who are either addicted to alcohol or drugs. I've heard Christians who are actually healed and who have no desire for that. Yet I know most Christians still have to struggle with it for the rest of their life. How much is it's chemical dependency versus oppression or whatever?
The question is, what about people who have addictive problems, drug dependencies, alcohol and so on? Some people seem to be delivered from them immediately, and other people seem to struggle with them the rest of their lives. Is some of this spiritual and some of it actually chemical, some predisposition by the physical makeup of the individual? Well, I can't answer that with a degree of finality. There are studies which indicate that probably 10% of the population do seem to have a predisposition to alcoholism, and that they simply can't tolerate alcohol without becoming totally addicted to it, which would seem to indicate that there is some physical predisposition on some people. On the other hand, there are lots of illustrations of people being, as you say, completely delivered from it. Story in the sports section of today's Tribune about the top American decathlon athlete who, as a young man, was an alcoholic and then was introduced to, as they put it, fundamentalist Christianity, and that delivered him from that, changed his whole motivation, and has enabled him to reach a level of discipline necessary to be a decathlon champion. You know anything about the decathlon, you know that requires a phenomenal amount of basic talent to begin with, and discipline to master 10 field events in track. Phenomenal. It takes phenomenal skill. Well, there is the testimony of a man who was delivered from being addicted to alcohol and now is demonstrating the exact opposite of that in the degree of discipline required for his sport. I think that God always wants to deliver a person from that kind of addiction. I don't think that it is ever God's will that a person be so under the control of alcohol, for example, that they have to drink. I think what this case is that you have to learn that you do have to stay away from it. So you just don't deliberately tempt yourself. I remember when our older boy was young, we were out in Africa, and we had some flowering shrubs that were very tempting to him to want to go and pick those, and he'd been told not to do it. So what does he do? He stands there and looks at them. And it's like the man who has been an alcoholic and walks past the tavern every day, smells the aroma and so on, instead of taking a detour around it. I think we have to use the disciplines of life in some of those cases. And some people have to use more discipline than others. To some people, it's no problem at all. Drinking is just, it's repulsive to me. I have no desire to drink. I can't, I suppose I could name one or two possible benefits from taking alcohol in, but alcohol is basically a depressant drug that in even small quantities deadens the highest sensibilities of my brain. If you diagram the functions of the brain and put the inhibitory level at the top, which is that's what gives you your keenest sense of value of what's right and wrong, the first thing alcohol does is to deaden that sense of what's right and wrong. That's why people under the influence even of a little bit of alcohol take chances in driving that they wouldn't take otherwise. It's why the guys in the Army knew if they could get that girl to take a few drinks that she'd be an easy mark sexually because her inhibitions would be gone. Now, why in the world would a Christian want to deaden that which gives him the keenest sense of what's right and wrong? Well, I'm not here to lecture on temperance, but that's no temptation to me. I've settled that issue so thoroughly in my mind that I find it repulsive rather than tempting. But I know people who can't get close to it because they have been alcoholics in the past. And to go to a church where they use real wine in the communion presents a problem for them. And that's not a problem for me. I'm not so legalistic that I wouldn't take wine in an Episcopal church, but some people that is a problem and they have to draw the lines there. So that's a difficult thing, I think, to give a clear, pat answer on it, but I think that's some thoughts on it.
You shows again our propensity to drawing that line between the internal and the external.
Yeah.
When we deal with our body, we're dealing with one more aspect of a fallen world. Our bodies are part of that fallen world as well. And so whether it would be an external, if you will, an external influence, or whether it would be an internal influence, it's still part of that fallen world. To draw the line.
Yeah. The point is that we're just part of a fallen world, and our bodies are part of that. We are totally a part of a fallen world, and to try to make these nice, clear distinctions, either or, is to revert to that old worldview that we have basically rejected. It's to say we're like this, not like this, and we just have to hang on to that concept. Okay, any other comments or questions about any of this before we shift gears? We have a rather major transition to a new topic. Okay, yes.
Earlier you had mentioned that you believe that Satan appoints a demon to a person, and that demon familiarizes him or her or whatever itself to that person. So you're saying that, like, the basic condition that I feel that I have this certain particular demon always harassing me, not so much various or random. So you're saying one person has one demon always in that sense?
Yeah, well, the question is, do I have just one demon that tempts and harasses me, or are there a bunch of them out there that may be doing different things? Well, I can't say with any degree of confidence based on what I read in the scriptures. But again, I assume that there are so many angels and so many demons that numbers is just not an issue. So we said earlier when we talked about the demons, people say, if you cast a demon into the pit, does that mean there's one less on earth to bother us? And I say, yeah, it probably does, but it doesn't make a bit of difference because there's so many of them that you wouldn't notice the absence of a few. And I think that that's the way it is in terms of numbers. And so in terms of whether it's one demon tempting me or a bunch of them, I would say that generally speaking, where there's one, there's more. That they don't work solo very much. It's most unusual to find one demon in a person. Occasionally you may find that, but almost always if there's one demon, there are going to be some others that are with him. So I assume that they work in groups and that there probably are more, but that there is probably one that is especially assigned to me as sort of the person in charge of the operation. Now, I can't prove that to you other than through experience.
That was my next point. What biblical basis do you have for saying that as we have a guardian angel, there is also an unholy angel? Is there any biblical scriptural basis for coming to that conclusion?
No, not, I can't give you chapter and verse. Only the generalization that Satan, by and large, tries to reproduce in his kingdom anything that God does in his. So it's a logical deduction from that kind of thinking, no proof text or anything. And that's true with many things that we're dealing with. Okay, the title of the course is Power Encounter. And so far we have probably not used that term. We have talked entirely of spiritual warfare. And there is a sense in which I guess I would prefer to perhaps stick with spiritual warfare as the generalization. The term power encounter was chosen initially because the course was designed in the first instance to be a course for missionaries who would be engaged in power encounters in missionary settings where there was a clear situation in which God was on one side in his power and the pagan belief systems, the demons, the spirits, whatever on the other side would be in a clear and open confrontation, and the ability of God to win in that kind of a confrontation was the power encounter. The term originally, probably, as far as I'm aware, comes from the writings of Alan Tippett, Tippett. Alan Tippett died within the last year, but he was, for many years, a missionary in Polynesia, and later on the faculty of the School of World Mission at Fuller Theological Seminary. He has written a number of books, particularly on Polynesia, church growth. It was our hope. He was the one who first taught a course in Power Encounter here at Trinity. Now, as he taught, it was taught in the Doctor of Missiology program, and it was before I was here on the faculty, so I did not have direct contact with the course. But as I've seen his syllabus, it was primarily an historical study of power encounters in the history of the church, rather than a practical spiritual warfare course that we're going through here. He gave a series of lectures at the Lincoln Christian Seminary in Lincoln, Illinois, back in, I guess I've forgotten the date. Don't have it in my notes. Back in the 1970s. And one of the titles of his lectures included the term power encounter. And the book that comes out of it is called Verdict Theology in Christian Missions. And that's probably where the term first occurred in the missionary literature. Then in his books on church growth in southern Polynesia, in an article he wrote for the Perspectives book edited by Hawthorne and Winter, he again uses the term, but nowhere does he define it. He doesn't reduce it to a definition. He simply talks about it. He says a power encounter consists of powers and counterpowers. A power encounter is both an act of commitment and an act of rejection, a spiritual encounter. He says the biblical concept is one of clear power encounter, one dunamis against the other. A power encounter is a conflict of powers doing battle for a verdict of victory or defeat for man's soul. That was out of the Lincoln lectures, the last two. But as I say, he nowhere reduces that to a clear definition. We had all hoped that he was going to write his magnum opus on this subject, and he died before he got it done. C. Peter Wagner from Fuller says, a power encounter is a visible, practical demonstration that Jesus is more powerful than the false gods or spirits worshipped or feared by a people group. A visible, practical demonstration. There are two general approaches to the idea of power encounter. One is that I have enunciated as this narrow definition of the open, visible encounter with the direct aim that ministry results from it. Let me give you a couple of examples of this. The first is from a thesis by Timothy Camps, K-A-M-P-S, which was written at Columbia Graduate School of Theology and Missions, or now called Columbia Biblical Seminary, a few years ago. Camps is a Christian Missionary Alliance man who's now pastoring up in Wisconsin. But the definition he used in that thesis is one I'm going to show you. And in the thesis, he uses this definition as a basis for examining a whole series of biblical passages or biblical concepts for the way in which they reflect the concepts of power encounter. And if you want a stimulating biblical study of the whole concept, the thesis would be the place to look, and it is available in our library. So he says a power encounter is a spiritual encounter, and the key word, of course, is spiritual, that exposes and calls to account the powers of darkness in their varied forms. Now notice that it is an intentional act. It calls them to account. It is a Christian doing something deliberately, not something that just happens in the course of life, but it is an encounter that exposes and calls to account the powers of darkness in their varied forms by the power of God. So it's on the basis of the power of God that the missionary, the Christian, is encountering the enemy power for the purpose of revealing the identity of the one true God, a ministry purpose. This isn't just spiritual warfare where you're battling for your own spiritual victory. This is this public, overt act where the purpose is to reveal the identity of the one true God, resulting in an acknowledgement of and or allegiance to his lordship by those present. So the way the term is generally used, and probably the way it's going to be used in most missionary literature, is with this very clear, overt, ministry-oriented concept. Another example of that comes from a mission organization that at this stage prefers to, again, remain anonymous because this was only a working definition and was not the point that they finally agreed that they would come down on once and for all. But it illustrates the kind of thinking that says it is the direct and open confrontation. Again, notice direct, open, of overt demonic manifestations. This isn't the struggle that's going on inside you as the missionary. This is the overt manifestations that will be seen in demonized people. Generally, though not exclusively, through human medium. That is to say, people are going to be involved in this. This isn't something which God does by his own sovereign power. but it's something that people are involved in. By my claiming of the promises of God, by my using of spiritual authority, at least by prayer. But there will be a human medium to demonstrate the superior power of God with the ultimate purpose of bringing people to salvation. Well, those are illustrations of the narrow view. I use a somewhat broader view, definition of it. I'll have to give it to you next Tuesday because there isn't time to do it in this period. So we'll pick up at that